I never thought saying no to a beer would cost me my job. My boss called it team spirit, but really it was just his excuse to cut anyone who didn't suck up to him. I got fired for refusing to join his after-hours drinking club. But 3 months later, the tables turned. Jason Thompson was your typical IT guy, quiet, focused on his work, and never interested in office gossip. He wasn't the type to participate in conversations about the latest movies or the best food spots in town. Most of his time was spent at his desk dealing with computer systems code and tech projects he truly enjoyed. The company Jason worked for had a large staff, but the office culture was a little different from other places. Here it wasn't just about getting your job done, it was about fitting in with the team. You didn't just work together. You had to drink together after hours, too. Joining in these after-hours bonding sessions wasn't just a way to build relationships. It was a test of whether or not you truly belonged. Jason thought he didn't need to participate in those drinking sessions to prove his worth. He believed his job was about doing his work well, not about socializing with coworkers outside of office hours, but his boss, Mark Stevens, thought otherwise. Mark was the kind of boss who lived for these after-work gatherings, always the first to suggest a drink, and would expect everyone to join in. Mark, a middle-aged man with a friendly, almost fatherly appearance, was actually the type of person who wielded power through manipulation. He was the life of the office parties, the one who made everyone laugh and feel included. But it was all a game where compliance was rewarded and disobedience was punished. For Mark, the real measure of teamwork wasn't about results, but about your ability to play along with his social demands. One day, after a long day at work, Mark approached Jason with the usual invitation to drinks. "Come on, Jason," he said with a grin. "It's team spirit. We could all use a break." Jason politely declined, explaining that he had personal matters to attend to. "Thanks, but I have something to take care of at home." Mark gave a small chuckle, but there was something in his eyes, something cold. Jason didn't think much of it at the time, but that simple refusal would come back to haunt him. The very next day, Jason was called into the HR office. "We need to talk about your integration with the team," the HR rep said. Jason thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. His refusal to go out with Mark wasn't just a small issue. It was a strike against him. The HR department said Jason wasn't fitting into the team and that his attitude was detrimental to the office culture. Despite his perfect work performance, despite his productivity, he was told he wasn't the kind of employee they needed. And just like that, Jason was fired. Not because he wasn't good at his job, but because he didn't follow the unspoken rule of the office to be a part of Mark's social circle, to suck up and participate in the after-hours drinking culture. His professional reputation meant nothing in comparison to the team spirit Mark preached. Jason's life was turned upside down, but instead of feeling defeated, he made a decision. He would no longer be a passive player in someone else's game. With his severance pay, he started his own tech startup. It was risky, but he was confident in his skills and vision. Slowly but surely, he built the company, finding investors who believed in his idea. His life was heading in a new direction. But as fate would have it, Mark's company soon hit hard times. Mark, once untouchable, was fired from his own company, the company he had built by exploiting his employees for his own personal gain. As he scrolled through job listings one night, he came across a new opportunity, one at Jason's startup. Desperate Mark applied, unaware that Jason was now the one calling the shots. 3 months passed, and Jason's life had completely transformed. He wasn't just surviving anymore. he was thriving. His startup, initially just an idea, scribbled on a napkin, was beginning to take shape. With his expertise and a few early investments, he was building something that could one day rival the big players in the tech industry. The road hadn't been easy. He had spent countless nights coding, meeting with potential investors, and facing the overwhelming pressure of turning his dream into reality. But he was determined. The contrast between his new life and his old one was stark. Every morning, he woke up with purpose. Every task he completed felt like a step closer to the success he had dreamed of. There were no more office politics, no more after-hours drinking sessions. Jason worked alone, but with a team of dedicated people who shared his vision. They weren't just employees. They were partners driven by the same goal, not by the need to please a boss. Meanwhile, Mark Stevens, the man who had fired him, was beginning to unravel. His company was struggling. The team spirit he had worked so hard to create had never been about actual teamwork, but rather control. Mark's leadership style, built on manipulation and fear, was starting to show its cracks. His employees had begun to leave in droves, unwilling to tolerate the toxic atmosphere any longer. Jason, though, didn't pay much attention to Mark's downfall. His focus was entirely on his own company. That is, until one afternoon, while Jason was reviewing potential hires, he received an unexpected email. It was from none other than Mark Stevens. "I've recently come across an opportunity with your company, and I'd like to apply for the role of Senior Product Manager. I've attached my resume. I would appreciate the chance to discuss how my experience could be valuable to your team." Jason sat back in his chair staring at the email. He felt a mix of emotions: disbelief, amusement, and something darker that he couldn't quite place. This was the man who had fired him, the one who had built a toxic environment based on fear and manipulation. And now he was asking to join Jason's team. The irony wasn't lost on him. Jason thought about all the times Mark had belittled his work, pushed him aside, and used his influence to control the office. He remembered the day he had walked into that HR meeting and was told that his lack of team spirit was the reason he was being fired. He had been cast aside like he was nothing, all because he refused to follow Mark's orders. For a moment, Jason considered just deleting the email, pretending it had never happened. But then he realized this was an opportunity. This was his chance to set the record straight, to put Mark in his place, and make him realize what it felt like to be the one looking for a job. Jason took a deep breath and opened his laptop. He replied to Mark's email with a simple, professional invitation. "Thank you for your interest in the position. We'd be happy to schedule an interview. Please feel free to select a time from my calendar." Jason hit send, his fingers tapping lightly on the keyboard. The decision was made. Mark Stevens would now have to come to him, beg for a job, and face the very man he had wronged. The interview was scheduled for the following week. Jason couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. He wasn't angry. No anger would be too simple. This was about justice. This was about giving Mark a taste of his own medicine. As the day of the interview approached, Jason found himself preparing meticulously. He reviewed Mark's resume, remembering all the projects Mark had once bragged about, all the empty promises he had made. But Jason wasn't interested in Mark's qualifications or experience. He knew all he needed was the chance to see the man who had ruined his career squirm in front of him. The interview room was set up, the time was scheduled, and now all that was left was to wait. Jason's mind raced as he thought about how he would handle the situation. He could be ruthless, ask Mark about the toxic environment he had created, or bring up how he had fired him without cause. But Jason had learned something during his time in the startup world. The best revenge wasn't always the loudest. Sometimes the most effective form of justice was silence. He would make Mark realize that his actions had consequences. And this time, Jason would be the one holding the power. The day of the interview finally arrived. Jason walked into the conference room, his heart racing with a mix of anticipation and cold, calculated focus. He had everything ready from Mark's resume to the questions he had crafted in his mind. But what he was truly prepared for wasn't the professional back and forth of a typical job interview. No, this was personal. This was about power, and Jason was ready to take it back. As he sat down at the head of the table, his eyes flicked to the clock. Mark was due in 5 minutes. Jason wasn't nervous. In fact, he felt strangely calm. He had worked hard to get where he was, and now he was in control. He was the one who had built something from nothing. And Mark? He was the one who had tried to tear him down for not fitting into his mold. Mark entered the room promptly, a bit flustered as he walked in, clearly uncomfortable in the sleek, modern setting of Jason's startup office. He wasn't used to this environment, one where merit mattered more than office politics. He had been a big fish in a small pond, manipulating his subordinates for years. But here in this space, he was just another candidate seeking employment. A far cry from the powerful man who had once called the shots. Jason studied him carefully as Mark took a seat. His eyes were nervous, shifting around the room as if trying to find something familiar in this strange new place. Mark's once impeccable suit now seemed out of place, too flashy for the minimalist, tech-driven atmosphere Jason had cultivated. "Mr. Stevens?" Jason said, his voice calm and steady. "Thank you for coming in today." Mark nodded awkwardly. "Of course, Jason. It's a pleasure. You've got a great setup here." He glanced around the room, trying to mask his discomfort. "I've been following your company's growth, and I'm really impressed with what you've accomplished. I know I could bring a lot to your team." Jason didn't respond immediately. He let the silence hang in the air for a moment, allowing Mark to feel the weight of his words. This wasn't a conversation between equals. Jason was in control now. "Let's get right to it," Jason said, leaning forward slightly. "You've listed a lot of impressive achievements in your resume, Mark, but I want to focus on one thing: your leadership style." Mark's expression faltered for a second. He hadn't expected to dive into something so personal so quickly. "Sure," he replied, straightening up. "I believe in motivating teams through team spirit, creating an environment where everyone feels like they're part of something bigger, a cohesive unit." Jason smiled to himself, knowing this was the perfect moment to push him. "I see. But let's be honest here. I remember the team spirit you promoted at your last company. The after-hours drinking, the pressure to conform. You didn't exactly give people a choice, did you?" Mark's face turned a shade paler, his usual confident demeanor starting to crack. "Well, I believe that's what helps build strong relationships. It's about bonding with your colleagues outside of work to really understand them as people." His voice wavered slightly. "It's all about unity, right?" Jason couldn't help but laugh softly under his breath. "Unity, sure. But you see, Mark, there's a difference between building unity and manipulating people. You see, I don't need to coerce my employees into spending their evenings drinking with me to know they're loyal. I just need to trust them and let them do their work without having to pass a loyalty test in the form of happy hour." Mark shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable now. The tables had turned, and he was beginning to feel the heat. His usual method of intimidation, the charm, the control, the manipulation, wasn't working here. Jason wasn't just a former employee he could easily push around. Jason was now a CEO with a thriving company, someone who didn't need Mark's approval. I don't think you understand. Jason, Mark continued, trying to regain his composure. Sometimes you have to take risks in leadership, make tough decisions, and show people that you're willing to go the extra mile. It's about setting the example. Jason leaned in his voice dropping just slightly to add more weight to his words. I understand perfectly. I understand that you didn't care about the people you led. You only cared about whether they could make you feel like you were the center of the universe. You didn't lead Mark. You manipulated. There was a long pause, the tension between them palpable. Mark's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. Jason could see the desperation in his eyes. He was floundering, and Jason knew it. He was a man out of his depth, trying to swim in waters where he had no power. The interview continued, but Jason wasn't interested in Mark's responses anymore. He wasn't even really listening. This was no longer about hiring someone for a job. This was about making Mark feel the consequences of his actions. This was about showing him what it felt like to be the one searching for a chance, the one begging for a seat at the table. And Jason was in no mood to offer him one. Thank you for your time today, Mark, Jason said, cutting the interview short. We'll be in touch. Mark stood up, clearly, caught off guard by the abrupt ending. Wait, you can't just, he started to protest, but Jason held up his hand, stopping him. I'll be honest, Mark. I don't think I'll be offering you a position. But you should remember this. There's a fine line between being a leader and being a manipulator. You've crossed that line more times than I can count. Mark's face darkened, but he said nothing. As he gathered his things and left the room, leaving Jason alone with the satisfaction of knowing that the power had shifted. As Mark walked out the door, Jason sat back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. He didn't need to fire Mark. He didn't need to humiliate him publicly. He had done something far more powerful. He had exposed him for what he truly was. Jason had won. Mark didn't hear back from Jason's company. A week passed, then two. And soon he got the message. Thank you for your time. We have chosen to move forward with other candidates. No explanation, no feedback, just rejection. But Jason knew that wasn't the end, not for someone like Mark. A month later, during a lunch break, Jason overheard two junior developers chatting outside the break room. Hey, did you hear about Mark Stevens? The guy who used to run it over at Nexa Corp. Yeah, what a fall I heard. He applied to like 10 startups. Nobody's hiring him. Jason said nothing. But inside, he knew the damage wasn't just from one failed interview. It was from his reputation, finally catching up to him. Jason didn't go out of his way to sabotage Mark. He didn't need to. Mark had burned too many bridges on his own. The whispers in the industry were enough. He's toxic, one founder had said in a private Slack channel. Jason was part of. He expects people to kiss his ring. Someone else added, Jason had grown in that time. His company landed a new round of Series A funding. He moved offices to a larger space. He started mentoring young professionals, especially those who had been dismissed, underestimated, or bullied, like he once was one afternoon. While attending a tech networking event, Jason spotted a familiar face. Mark was sitting alone near the back, nursing a drink, scrolling through his phone. His once proud posture was gone. His eyes looked tired. Jason almost walked past, but something made him stop. Mark noticed him and gave a weak smile. Jason? Jason nodded politely. Mark? There was an awkward silence between them, thick with the weight of what had passed. Then Mark spoke almost under his breath. I guess I owe you an apology. Jason tilted his head. For what? Mark looked away. Back at Nexa. I was wrong about you. About a lot of things. I let my ego run the place, and I hurt people. He paused, then added I thought loyalty meant control. But you built something real. Jason didn't respond right away. He wasn't angry. Not anymore. Mark wasn't a threat now. He was just sad. Jason looked at him, not as a rival, but as a lesson. A warning of what happens when leadership becomes vanity, when power is used to dominate instead of uplift. He finally said, We all have choices, Mark. You made yours, so did I. Mark nodded slowly. You don't have to forgive me. I wouldn't if I were you. Jason didn't smile, but his voice was steady. I'm not here to forgive you. I'm here to remember what not to become. He turned and walked away, leaving Mark in silence. And in that moment, revenge didn't need to be loud. It didn't need to be cruel. Sometimes the best revenge is success without spite, dignity without apology, and knowing the person who tried to break you is now haunted by what they couldn't destroy. 3 months later, Jason stood in front of his team during their Friday town hall meeting. The company had just signed their biggest client, yet a deal that would double their revenue over the next year. He looked around at the people in the room, engineers, marketers, interns, even the janitor. Each one had been hired, not for their ability to charm or flatter, but for their integrity and grit. We built this together, Jason said, not through politics, not through backroom deals, but by standing up for what mattered. There was a round of applause, genuine and proud. That night, Jason stayed late in the office, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He walked past the rows of desks, the whiteboards scribbled with code and ideas, the fridge stocked with drinks, non-alcoholic, and smiled. He remembered how it all started. A job he thought he needed, a boss who mistook control for leadership, a moment one beer that turned into a career-defining decision. And now, he didn't just have a job. He had a purpose, a mission, and a company that reflected his values. As he closed his laptop and turned off the lights, Jason paused by the front door. Pinned to the corkboard was a quote someone had scribbled earlier that week. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. He took a deep breath. Mark had made him feel small, powerless, expendable. Jason had chosen to do the opposite, to lead with empathy, fairness, and strength. And that was the true victory. Not the job, not the office, not the rejection, but becoming the kind of leader he once wished he had.